source for everything paranormal. ParaX.
Throughout the ages, history has been altered by word of mouth and the misrepresentation of those who might not have been present when some of the world's most significant events took place. Channelers Barry and Connie Strohm bring through the spirits of those who actually witnessed or took part in these historical events and lets them tell their stories in their own words. Welcome to Channeling History. And now, here are your hosts, Barry and Connie Strohm.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Channeling History. By now, you should know that we're the only show where we speak to the souls that made things happen. We're brought to you every Sunday on the ParaX radio network at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. We invite you to join us in the chat room and submit your own questions. Tonight's going to be very interesting. We have General Robert E. Lee with us, and I don't know how many of you are aware of it, but I'm a bit of a history nut. My first book was Honing in History, the Battle of Gettysburg. So I'm really looking forward to this tonight. Anyway, I'm Barry Strohm, your host, and I'll be speaking the words of our spirit guests.
And I'm Connie Strohm, your co-host. We'd like you to please tell your friends about us so we can continue to grow our audience, because we think we're getting some really good information out there from these souls we talk to. All of our shows are available for download on Podomatic.com and our YouTube channel. Tonight, we're going to channel, as Barry said, the spirit of Robert E. Lee, who was the commander of the Southern forces during the Civil War. He was also a slave owner, and we will be asking him many questions about the institution of slavery.
Now, I know there's going to be some individuals that are going to find some of our subject matter offensive tonight, so we definitely are going to repeat our disclaimer. Opinions or statements voiced on our show are the channeled words of the spirits and do not necessarily reflect the words of the ParaX network, our sponsors, or even Connie and I. We've got a little over 240 videos available on our YouTube channel. It's in my name, Barry Strohm. You'll find all of our Channeling History shows are there, as well as our podcasts, A Weekly Message from Jesus, and Eternity Speaks.
Last week, we had what we thought was a very good interview with President Harry Truman. He served as president during one of our most difficult times, making the decision to use the atomic bomb against Japan and facing the Soviet Union in the Cold War. The show will definitely give you insight into some of the decisions that are having an effect on our modern world today.
Okay, now when we begin channeling, Connie, as you know, are going to answer the questions, and I'll answer them in the words of the spirits. But before we start, we always say a prayer of protection. So Connie, let's get the prayer out of the way, and we'll begin to channel with General Lee.
God, please grant us your wisdom and protection. Grant us the knowledge that we can handle and keep us safe from all things that will harm us. Keep the messages positive, pure love. Keep us safe from our egos. We ask these things in the light of the seen, the unseen, and the honesty of God.
All right, Connie, let's get her going. I'm anxious for this tonight.
Yes, General Lee, thank you so much for joining us. Would you like to begin with a statement?
Yes, I would. I lived in a very, very difficult time. The North and the South could not agree on much of anything. The economy of the South was pretty much built on a foundation of slavery. It was not the right thing, but it was the way of things in those days. I loved the military. I served in the Union Army for 32 years. I was offered a major generalship in the Union Army when it looked like war was going to break out. I was terribly torn. What I was going to do was the hardest decision of my life. I had many, many friends in the Union Army. Many of those people did come with us and join the Confederacy. But we were continuously facing brothers and friends. It was just a terrible time for our country. I did what I thought was right. I tried to do it with dignity, and I tried to do it with honor. I know there are many people that are going to disagree with much of the things that I'm going to say tonight, but I was but a human. I tried to make the best decisions I could, and I tried very hard.
Okay, General, your father was Henry Lee, known as Light Horse Harry Lee, from his participation in the Revolutionary War. Would you tell us about your father?
My father was actually a very amazing individual. He served in the Revolutionary Army. A lot of his service was in the southern part of the country. Served with Francis Marion in the Carolinas. Played a very, very important role in preserving the Union. Served time in Congress. Very, very well known. Very important person. He made some bad decisions as well. He wasn't much of a businessman. But he was a great military example, and that was one reason why I wanted to go to the military academy at West Point, so that I could follow in his shoes.
When you were 2 years old, your father served a year in debtor's prison. How did he wind up in debtor's prison?
Well, as I said, he wasn't a very good businessman. He tried very hard at times to make things work. He was a very strong-willed person, and he made a lot of decisions that he shouldn't have made. Ran up a lot of debts, couldn't pay for them. In those days, when you ran up debt, they'd send you to prison for it. Of course, once you were in prison, you couldn't work to pay off those debts, but that didn't really matter. But it was a very difficult time for us.
I'm sure. As you were growing up, what was your opinion on God and religion?
I always had an incredibly strong belief in God. There was never any doubt in my mind that there was a supreme being. I felt that he controlled many things. I had read the Gospels. I believed what was in the book. I tried to live my life according to what I thought God had commanded. There were times I obviously did not have time to pursue religion as I would have wanted to, but there was never any doubt in my mind that God existed. I prayed to him twice a day, every day.
Okay. In 1825, you entered the West Point Military Academy. Would you tell us about your experiences at West Point?
In those days, West Point was very heavy in an engineering curriculum. It was a very small school then. I know as you look at West Point now, it's this huge institution. But in my day, there were far less than often 50 students involved in the school. It was very strict. At the time, they would not let you even visit home for the first 2 years. There was a lot of hazing from upperclassmen. You were totally at the will of the officers at the school. It was, as you look back at it, your memories are a lot more fond of it than what it was when you were living it.
In 1829, you met Mary Custis, and later the two of you married. Will you tell us about her?
Mary came from a very rich Southern family. They had multiple plantations and many, many slaves. She was a wonderful person. She always supported me in what I did and my decisions. There were many times that I was away for long periods of time. She did her best to raise the family. We had many children. She was very used to slavery. She had several of her slaves that followed her and continued in her family after we were married. She treated them very, very well. She educated them. She did not abuse them in any way. The slaves that were in her family that served her actually loved her very much. And even though they were indentured, they did live very good lives for that time.
In 1846, you participated in the Mexican-American War as an aide to Winfield Scott. Tell us about your participation in that war.
We were part of the expeditionary force into Mexico. We vastly outnumbered them. We would engage them in small engagements. I would do a lot of scouting for the Army. I got to know General Scott very well during that time. And as you know, when the war began, General Scott was in charge of the northern forces at the 1st Manassas.
You also met Ulysses Grant during this time. What was your opinion about Grant while serving with him?
Grant was a very aggressive officer. He knew how to fight, and he knew military strategy very well. When I met him, I was very impressed with him. We were actually pretty good friends. He was an individual that needed to stay busy. He did have a bit of a problem with alcohol, but whenever it was important that he remained totally sober, he always did so. I knew he was going to have a very successful command in the future. I didn't realize that we would be such opponents, but I have nothing but respect for Ulysses.
In 1852, you became superintendent of the West Point Military Academy. Why did you describe it as the snake pit?
I tried to not be as hard on the soldiers. I thought that they would try to break as many of the young cadets as possible. It was a very difficult place. There were very strong traditions, and as I said before, there was much hazing. It was a place where it would either make a young man or it would break them. I thought there was something in between, and I tried to widen the fields of education, teach them more. I think my time at the military academy was very positive. Sadly, I did train many of the soldiers that we would fight against in the future. I cannot tell you how heartbreaking it was to be in battle and see somebody that you had known or taught laying on the field. It was just a terrible time for all of us.
Indeed. In 1855, you were transferred to the 2nd Cavalry Regiment in Texas, whose mission it was to protect settlers from Apache and Comanche attacks. What was your opinion of the Native Americans at that point?
The people were stealing their lands, and they were reacting to it very negatively, as anyone would. They didn't have concept of possessions of how many acres or farms or anything like that. They felt that their ancestors and they had lived on the land, and it was theirs. The land should support them. Settlers would come and they would build their homes, sometimes in very sacred areas for the Native Americans. And the Native Americans, especially Comanche and Apache, became very violent. They were extremely good fighters. They knew the terrain much better than we did. We were supposed to protect the settlers, and we did what we could. But I totally understood why they were fighting to preserve their lands. That's exactly what we did when the Civil War broke out. We fought to protect our lands that were being invaded, just as the Native Americans did.
In 1857, your father-in-law died and left you his plantations, debts, and slaves. What was the condition of the estate at that time?
Oh, it was terrible. They had run the plantations very poorly, and he had run up huge debts. He had many slaves. As I remember, there were something like 200 of them that we inherited when he passed. I tried my best to work off the debts of the plantations. To do that, I needed to have the slaves. There was simply no way that we could have ever paid off those plantation debts without having the labor force that we needed. My father-in-law had provided in his will that all of his slaves would be emancipated after 5 years. Many of them felt that we should be doing it immediately and resisted what I was trying to do in paying off the debts of the plantations. We did need them, and after the 5-year period, many of them were emancipated.
Tell us about the Arlington House plantation.
Arlington House Plantation was a beautiful property. It was on the other side of the Potomac River, very near to Washington, D.C. I realized when Lincoln called for 75,000 troops to invade and to end the insurrection that my plantation was going to be too close to Union territory. I had my wife move and leave and abandon the property. It was a gorgeous home overlooking, sitting on a hill. Once the war began and many of the Union soldiers were being killed, they started burying them on the property that was part of Arlington House. The property actually became Arlington Cemetery, but they thought that they would send me a great insult by burying the Union soldiers there. I felt very bad for the loss of soldiers on both sides. And Arlington is now a gorgeous place where all members of the military can rest in peace.
Okay, you said that some people suggested that you relieved the slaves immediately after your father-in-law passed. Did you do that?
No, as I said, I couldn't. There was no way. There were immense debts. If I could not find any way to pay back the debts, I feared I would find myself in debtor's prison. So I needed the slaves. I needed the labor. I wanted to relieve them, but I could see no other way but to maintain possession of the slaves for the 5-year period.
Okay, you saw that it was necessary, but what was your basic opinion of slavery?
I felt that slavery was wrong, but I also felt that in many instances, the white owners were educating them, were giving them much better lives than they would have ever had in Africa or in situations trying to earn their own livings at the time, because it was very difficult for Negro Americans to get jobs, or, basically they would have to farm for themselves in those days. Now, I'm not saying that there weren't many that totally mistreated their slaves. That is a fact. Many of them were whipped, they were tortured. Many of them were required to have sex with the owners. That was all terrible. I felt that it was inevitable at some time all the slaves would be emancipated.
Did you feel that God condoned slavery?
That's a difficult question. I felt that God wanted no person to be enslaved. But for hundreds of years, the entire economy of the South had depended on slavery. I felt that the ownership of slaves was something that would soon come to an end. What God felt, I fear, was not in accordance with what we felt.
After you took control of the Arlington plantation, you nearly had a slave revolt. Why did your slaves almost revolt?
They knew that it had been in the will that they would receive emancipation within 5 years, and they wanted it immediately. I had to figure out how to pay off the debts, and I needed them for that period to work so that we could make money and pay the debts off for the plantations. They were very upset, and they felt that it should be immediate, and I certainly can't blame them for feeling that way, but I felt very strongly that I needed them to work the plantations so that we could clear the debt from them.
Did you break up the slave families at Arlington in spite of the fact that they were supposed to be freed? Which I know you couldn't do.
There were some that were resisting very badly. And in those days, slaves were very, very valuable. I did put some of the families up for sale, but I did require that the people that were buying them understood that they would be freed within 5 years. And I made the individuals arranging the sales investigate the families and make sure that they were not going to be mistreated.
So I take it then you did not believe that slaves should be whipped.
There were times that I felt that physical, that they would need to be treated in a difficult physical manner when they absolutely refused to carry out the work that they were supposed to be doing. I must admit that there were times that I was forced to order that some of my slaves would be whipped, but not to the point that they would be totally injured.
Did you ever personally whip a slave?
I did not. That is not something I would ever have done.
Did you allow your soldiers to kidnap free black farmers and sell them into slavery?
I had heard rumors that that was taking place. I tried to stop it, but we were having a large problem with soldiers deserting at the time as well. I probably should have been more forceful about it, but keep in mind, some of the soldiers had come from deep states where slavery was critical to them. Now, I'm not protecting those slave owners. That was totally wrong. I probably should have been stronger about it, but I was continuously outnumbered by Union forces, and we were very, very busy for the years of the war. I did not want to cause a lot of dissension. I needed my soldiers to fight. I could not afford to lose any. I knew that the Union forces had the ability to regroup, restock. They had these great industrial areas where they could make weapons. We did not really have any of that in the South. We were always at a disadvantage. And there were times that I had to make decisions that I did not like to make because I simply could not afford to lose any of the fighters.
What was your opinion of the Emancipation Proclamation?
I thought that Lincoln offered a low blow to the South. I felt that we were still attempting to maintain our freedom and that he had no right to step in and offer emancipation.
What was your general opinion of President Lincoln? Other than that,
I thought that when Lincoln was elected, I knew that there would be war. Lincoln was a strict abolitionist. He had campaigned on it. The South had totally opposed his candidacy. And I knew that he would do all that he could to maintain the Union. I know now that he was a good man. He was doing what he truly believed. But when he became president, I knew that it was going to be the end of the Union.
So what did you think of Jefferson Davis?
Jefferson Davis was much more radical in his beliefs than I was. Davis was a huge proponent of slavery. He was a huge proponent of states' rights. Towards the end of the war, he did not even want me to surrender. He wanted our soldiers to continue fighting guerrilla warfare with the North. He was at times a very, very difficult person to work with.
Hey, when you arrived on the other side, how were you judged for your ownership and treatment of your slaves?
When I arrived on the other side, my guides pointed out that slavery was definitely not something of which God approved. They pointed out that I had made mistakes in pursuing slavery. They also noted that I had emancipated many slaves as well. I did not favor forcing slaves to fight on the side of the South. There were many that stayed with their masters and fought. And they pointed out that there were times that I would not have done enough when black soldiers were captured, Union soldiers. They felt that I had made multiple decisions that were not proper. I had truly acted within what I thought God would command. I found out that in many areas I had not. But I had always tried to live my life with dignity and honor. And for that, I was given much credit.
Okay, we have a question from the chat room. What was your reaction when the North discontinued prisoner exchange?
I felt that it was extreme. I had always insisted that when my soldiers had signed paroles, that they would honor them and not engage in fighting again. I tried to do everything with honor. I felt that we should have maintained prisoner exchanges because it was a huge hardship on us to try to feed and house prisoners when we did not even have enough food and clothing for our own soldiers. Many of our prisoner facilities were terrible, horrible places, just the same as the Union. The Union mistreated our prisoners as well. Prisoner exchanges would have helped eliminate the pressure on the prisoner of war camps. So I was upset when they ended it.
Okay, another question from the chat room is, did leading the Confederate Army affect your realm in heaven?
No, I was not. I basically remained in the position I was in when I started. The fact that I truly believed in what I was doing and that my leadership did save soldiers of the South's lives. Sadly, my leadership cost Union lives. But when individuals are fighting in war, they're trying to protect the individuals, in my case, from the South, the innocent people. Union soldiers were trying to protect people of the North. I did not gain position when I returned, but thankfully I did not lose any as well. Okay, everybody, let's take a little short break here, and we will be back.
Turn right after these brief messages.
order for the light to shine so brightly, the darkness must be present. Tune in every Monday at 10 o'clock for Dark Sun Rising on the ParaX Radio Network.
Hi, this is Marla Brooks from Stirring the Cauldron. Thursdays are a great night on the ParaX Radio Network. We start off the evening with Journey into the Light, Chapter 3, with your hosts, Psychic Little T and Tabby Cat Gash at 7 p.m. Eastern. Then, on the first and third Thursdays of the month at 8 p.m., it's Tango and Friends, hosted by Bruce Tango. And on the alternate Thursdays at 8 p.m., tune in to Stirring the Cauldron, the Archive podcast. Every week at 9 p.m. Eastern, join me on Stirring the Cauldron Live. And then at 10 p.m., stick around for New Aeon Now with Lily Alley, Davron Michaels, and Christine Matza. Finally, to round out the night, join Dr. Kelly Renee Schutz on the Paranormal Encounters podcast. All this every Thursday, right here on ParaX.
Have you ever wondered what Jesus and his followers would say if you could receive their messages today? In his new book, Spirits Speak, Channeling Jesus and the Holy Spirits, channeler and author Barry Strohm answers those questions for you. Using his gift of spirit communication, he brings you messages from such Holy Spirits as Moses, John the Baptist, Mary Magdalene, Mother Mary, Jesus, and even Mother Teresa and the Reverend Billy Graham. They discuss topics that are important for contemporary life in these troubled times. Spirits Speak, Channeling Jesus and the Holy Spirits is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other booksellers. Signed copies are available on the author's website, spiritspredict.com. After reading this book, you will never again say, "What would Jesus say or do?" Welcome back to Channeling History. Now, here are your hosts, Barry and Connie Strohm.
Welcome back, everybody. Connie, let's do it.
After Lincoln was elected president, you were offered a major general rank in the Union Army. Why did you turn it down, General?
My home, my family's home, we were from Virginia. I felt very strong alliance to Virginia. When Lincoln announced that he wanted 75,000 volunteers to put down the uprising, I knew that the battles would be fought in my home state. I'd served 32 years in the Union Army, but I just simply felt that I had to defend the country and the state in which I lived. So I chose that I would take officership in the Confederate Army and protect my state as well as I could.
Do you think there was any compromise that could have avoided the war?
I had thought it with the first. We had tried compromise. Politicians had tried the Missouri Compromise. They tried many things. But there were individuals in the South that just simply were not willing to compromise on the issue of slavery or in states' rights. As I look back at it, there may have been some answers, but given the times, the economy, the attitudes of the people in the North and the South, I don't think there was anything that could have done to avoid the war.
Okay, we have another question from our chat room. Do you think it would have been better to just have let the Union and the South split into two countries and avoided the war?
No, I don't think that the South could have existed long term on its own anyway. We were an agrarian country at that point, the South, and we relied on cotton. We didn't have all the industrial facilities that were in the North. And I think had we tried to exist as two countries, that both of us would have been weak. And I'm sure that there would have been European countries that would have tried to take over. I felt that I really don't think that there was anything that could have been done. And if they had had separate countries, they would have been weak. And I know Britain had not forgotten what happened to them before in the Revolution.
Okay, another question from the chat. Did you think that the federal government would eventually let the South secede?
No, I knew they were not going to let us succeed.
Okay. Did slavery play any role in your decision to support the Confederacy?
No, I knew that my plantations were going to be affected, our properties. Once war broke out, there was nothing we could do. I wanted to defend my home. It was that simple. My home was Virginia.
What was the main reason the South wanted to secede from the Union?
It was two. Obviously, slavery was a foundation that their whole economy was built on. But they felt very strongly about states' rights and that if they had the ability to secede from the Union if the states voted to do so.
Okay, many people at the beginning of the war thought it was going to be a short event. What did you think?
No, I felt from the start it was not going to be short. I was friendly with too many of the officers on the other side. I knew that many of them were weak, but I also knew that there were some very strong fighters. And I knew that the North had the industrial ability to fight forever if they needed to.
Okay, the Battle of Chancellorsville was considered one of your greatest victories, but unfortunately you lost Lieutenant General Thomas Stonewall Jackson when he was mistakenly shot by his own men. How did that event affect the rest of the war?
That was a terrible event for us. When Jackson was killed, I lost my best corps commander. I had to reassess my people, and I put individuals in command of core strength units that they had never tried to command before. Sadly, it happened right before I attempted to go up north. I found out that a lot of coordination problems resulted from it. I feel that if I had had Jackson and Longstreet as my corps commanders, that we would have perhaps had much different results at Gettysburg.
Yes, so after Chancellorsville, why did you decide to invade the North?
I felt that after Chancellorsville, the Union had suffered a defeat, a great defeat. I felt that if we threatened Washington or Philadelphia or some of the cities of the North, that we'd be able to negotiate a peace agreement. I also knew that our time was limited. We had limited manpower, we had limited equipment, ammunition. I felt that if we could not have invaded the North and forced a negotiated peace at that time, that we'd never be able to do it.
Did you want to engage Union forces at Gettysburg?
No, I didn't consider that a good area to fight. I wanted to have possession of the high ground. In our days, the army that had high ground had a huge advantage with their artillery and their men. We got forced into fighting in an area where I did not choose. The Union had the high ground all around Gettysburg, and it was just something we could not overcome.
Were you in poor health during the Gettysburg battle?
I was starting to have the first indications of heart problems, and I did have rheumatism. But I must have eaten something that was not right for me, and I was not feeling well. I had the runs, and it was very difficult and exhausting for me.
Okay, at Gettysburg, you won the first day, tied the second, and on the third day decided to attack the center of the Union line with Pickett's division. That attack failed with devastating losses. Why did you make the decision to do that attack?
I felt I did not have the information I needed to make the proper decisions. My cavalry had not shown up until late in the second day, and I did not realize just how much Meade had managed to build up his forces and fortify the line. I wanted to win. I mean, that was why we went north. I thought that we could do it. I was having Early's corps attack on the backside at Culp's Hill. I felt that if Early could attack and draw forces away from the center, that it would weaken the line that we were looking at. I finally had Stewart back, and I had Stewart coming around to the east, and I wanted him to come in and attack from that direction. What I had hoped for was a coordinated three-point attack. I still think that if that plan had worked, that we would have won at Gettysburg. Sadly, Stewart got defeated, never did make his attack as he was supposed to. Early was driven off of Culp's Hill early in the day, and the Union moved troops from Culp's Hill over to the line that Pickett was going to try to pierce. Our artillery was ineffective. We had bad fuses on much of the shells. They fired over the line. Our artillery really wasn't as effective as we thought it was. The Union actually stopped their artillery. We thought we were having success with it. What they were doing was changing into shot loads because they knew we were preparing to attack. I know that I made a terrible decision. I knew that open ground was going to be very difficult for our boys, but we had such great faith in them. They were such strong fighters. We knew that they would do their best, and they did. I know that Longstreet told me not to do it, and he was correct. I made the worst decision of the war when I sent Pickett in against that Union line on that day. I regretted it. I hated seeing all the boys that were killed. I take full blame for it. I still think that if all of my plan had come together, we would have had a chance. But with the other two parts of the attack falling apart, my boys were just slaughtered.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, you said that you and General Longstreet did differ on your decisions about the attack on Gettysburg. Do you spend much time with him now that you're both on the other side?
We don't spend a whole lot of time. We're friendly. I know that many people tried to blame Pete for what happened at Gettysburg. I never did. I know that after my passing, people tried to blame him as well, and he was bitter about it. So it was not Pete's fault. He was right. I can't say it in any better words.
Okay, after Gettysburg, did you really think the Confederacy could still win the war?
In my heart, I knew that we were going to have serious problems. The Union was pumping out soldiers and equipment. We were limited. My losses at Gettysburg were terrible, and I could not replace the fighters. After Gettysburg, we started to just simply fight more of a defensive action and just try to protect Petersburg and Richmond. Now, I must say that after Gettysburg, I knew we had a real problem.
Why didn't you just try to seek a way to end the war and save thousands of lives at that point?
Davis wanted no part of it. He wanted to fight to the bitter end. I was a military commander. I had to take orders. I did the best I could with the orders that I was given.
Yeah. We have another question from one of our listeners. It says, was your leadership of the Confederate Army in your life plan?
Yes. It was in my life plan that I would be a soldier. It was my own abilities that brought me to leadership, but it was definitely in my life plan that I chose a military career.
Okay. How would you rate yourself as a military commander?
There were times I should have been more forceful, and there were times that I should have been less forceful. I was always willing to assume responsibility for my own decisions. I made decisions that were good, and I made decisions that were bad. I think that I probably was more successful than anybody else that could have been fighting under the conditions that we did. I think all in all, I was a pretty good commander, but as I said, I made some terrible decisions.
Okay. What did you think when Ulysses Grant was made Union commander?
I knew we were in trouble. Prior to that, many of the commanders had been hesitant to fight. I knew I could take advantage of many of them. I knew them. I also knew that when Ulysses was named, things were going to change. He was like a dog on a bone. Many called him a butcher, but he would just keep pressing on. He knew that he had the advantage with more men, more equipment, and he knew that we could only sustain his attacks for so long. No, when Uli came in, I knew there was a serious problem.
You repeatedly talked of divine will. Do you think it was divine will that the Confederacy was defeated?
I think that God did not want slavery to continue. That is a sure fact. I know that things happened. For instance, when Jackson was killed, it was by our own soldiers. I do not think that the Confederate Army had the guidance of God.
Okay. Why did you feel such a devotion to the state of Virginia?
It was my home. It was where my family was. My wife had been in the state. She had all these properties. I truly felt that Virginia was my home. It was a place that you wanted to protect. Look at it this way. If somebody invaded where you are, and it is your home, would you want to protect your home? I had a terrible time making the decision of whether I wanted to fight for the North or the South. I could have had a major commission with the Union as I had with the South. I made the decision to protect my home.
Understandable. How did you feel Reconstruction should have been conducted after the war?
I think that Lincoln had the proper idea. He was going to enforce regulations that would have protected the freed slaves. He would have been better at controlling the white politicians from the South. After the war, much continued the same. Yes, they had emancipated the slaves. Yes, they were free people. But the white political organizations of the South joined together and terrorized the black communities. I would have rather have seen the military being sent down to protect the minorities at that time. When the slaves were freed, they had a very, very difficult time. Many of them were not educated. Many of them could not find work. And in the South, many of the whites would not hire them. The white leaders established the Ku Klux Klan. They used the Klan to terrorize people. They would hang them. They would torture them. I wish that the federal government would have taken a stronger position, sending the military and using them to protect the ones that needed protection. For years, the white politicians of the South managed to maintain segregation. I would point out to you that even at the beginning of World War II, the military was still segregated. I think that the government should have taken a much stronger stand in trying to force segregation.
What do you think when you see people tearing down your statues, General?
After the war, there were many, many people that thought that I had been the best commander possible for the South. They built monuments, but they built monuments for many heroes throughout time. One thing that everybody agrees with is that I tried to be a very honorable and honest person. I did my best. I led when I was physically ill. I tried to make the best decisions. I tried to preserve the lives of my soldiers. There were many individuals that respected my leadership, and they felt that the history of that leadership would be preserved by creating statues. Now, many people are feeling that those statues should come down because I own slaves. Yes, I totally admit that was wrong. But if you look at it through the eyes of history and look at it from the times that were taking place, slavery was viewed differently in the South. It was viewed as a necessity of existence. Yes, it was terribly wrong, no question about it. The people of the North decided that slavery should be ended, and we went to war over it. Slavery was something that was going to at some time tear the country apart. Segregation had to end. Today, you're seeing that truly all men are equal. When African Americans are given the educations, opportunities, it is now obvious that they have the same abilities as any white person would have, and they're capable of leadership, they're capable of everything. Now that I'm over here, I truly understand that all souls are created equal. Slavery was terrible. Yes, I had to own slaves. At that time, I looked at it as the only way I could exist and pay off debts. I did emancipate my slaves, and I did try to do the best for the country I was serving. I did my best when I served the Union. I did my best when I served the South. I always did my best.
Did you support the Ku Klux Klan?
I should have opposed the Klan more strongly. Many of my friends were actually members of the Klan. Many of the Confederate soldiers and officers were participating. They were the same ones that felt that we should have conducted guerrilla warfare after the war. I totally and emphatically disagreed with that concept. After the war, and I'm not making excuses, but my health was failing fairly rapidly. I basically tried to remain away from things. I was heartbroken about what had taken place in the war, and I just wanted to end my life very simply. I was respected by many. I should have probably come out and spoken strongly against what was taking place with the Ku Klux Klan and what the political leaders were doing. But I did not.
What did you think when Lincoln was assassinated?
I thought it was terrible. I had heard what Lincoln had been planning for after the war. I knew that they were trying to figure out the best way to rebuild the South. And I knew that Lincoln was an honest person. He had done many things that I disagreed with. But I felt that he truly had the best ideas for leadership that would take place after the war. When he was killed, I knew that there were many who were going to take it out on the South. It was a disaster following a disaster.
Okay. What are you proudest of in your life that you led?
I think I'm most proud of the fact that I was always true to myself. I tried to be honest. I was God-fearing. I tried to be the best leader I could be. And I tried to do everything with dignity. I felt that honor was incredibly important for any individual, especially any of us that were in leadership. I'm proudest of the way that I lived my life.
Okay, General, you're seeing a lack of compromise and a lot of hatred between our current political parties. How does that compare with political differences prior to the Civil War?
You have many, many hatreds and differences, but you don't have that overriding problem of slavery to solve. Your differences are political. The differences that I lived through resulted in a great war. Your politicians absolutely need to learn the word compromise. If they don't, then your country is going to have a problem.
Okay, General, thank you so much for joining us and being so honest with us this evening. Do you have a final message for our listeners?
Yes, I would like to tell all of you to live with honor, do what you feel is right, follow God's teachings. You now have clarity in His words. You're hearing messages that are coming directly from Him. Follow the golden rules He tells you. Do unto others. Totally understand that all people are created equal. Just because a person's skin is a different color does not mean that he is different from you. You will find out when you return home that everyone is truly equal. I didn't truly understand that when I walked the earth. I did not truly understand that when I owned slaves. I made bad decisions. And now that I'm over here, I understand just how bad they were. Be kind to one another and coexist. You are living in very, very difficult times. Even though there are probably no energies that will tear your country apart like it did when I was living, there are many countries out there that truly hate you. And if they see weakness in your government, they will respond accordingly and test you. So thank you for having me. I hope that the way I live my life did not disturb too many people. But thank you. Thank you for having me. And may God bless all of you.
Thank you, General. God bless you, and thank you so much for joining us.
Okay. Next week, we're going to do something a little contrasty. We're going to have the spirit of President Richard Nixon with us. He's going to be asking a lot of questions, especially a bunch about the Watergate break-in. Submit questions, suggestions for future guests through our email channeling historyonparax@gmail.com. My previous book, or my book, Spirit Speak, Channeling Jesus and the Holy Spirit, is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, my websites, Kindle. If you want it, it ain't hard to find. Anyway, thank you so much for listening to us tonight. We will be back again next Sunday at 9 o'clock Eastern Time on the ParaX Radio Network.
And I would also like to thank all of you for listening and joining in our chat room. God bless you all. Have a wonderful week.
Tune in again next week for another electrifying episode, as we never know who will make an appearance or who will come through the portal. Any rebroadcast or other use of this program without explicit permission is strictly prohibited. Copyright 2020. Our Story Begins by Kevin MacLeod, licensed through Incompetech.com.